Hello, everyone. I need you to listen, and I mean really listen, to what I'm about to tell you, because what's happening right now just across our northern border is a story of such profound consequence that its omission from the American mainstream media borders on journalistic malpractice. While you're being fed a constant diet of domestic political theater, while Donald Trump is having his daily meltdowns on Truth Social, pounding his chest and screaming about the tariffs he's going to use to bring Canada to its knees, something fundamental, something seismic is shifting in the world order, and it's happening right under our noses. This isn't the story Trump wanted. It's certainly not the narrative his yes men and economic advisors predicted, and it is the polar opposite of the fairy tale he's spinning for his supporters at his rallies. The grand narrative was supposed to be simple. Trump, the master dealmaker, would threaten Canada, and Canada, our supposedly weak and dependent little brother to the north, would instantly fold. The Canadian dollar would crater, their businesses would panic and flee south, and the world would be reminded that America and only America calls the shots. But a funny thing happened on the way to Canada's predicted surrender. They didn't surrender. They didn't even flinch. In fact, the exact opposite is happening. Canada's economy just released a set of numbers so robust, so defiant in the face of American pressure, that they have sent economists in Washington and on Wall Street scrambling to tear up their projections. And one man, Prime Minister Mark Carney, saw this coming from 1,000 miles away. He didn't just see it, he planned for it. Let me walk you through the data that came out this week, the hard numbers that the American media is so conveniently choosing to ignore because they shatter the myth of Trump's economic genius. In February, Canadian inflation didn't just hold steady, it didn't just slow down, it dropped. It went down. This is happening at the very same moment the American economy is being choked by inflationary pressures that are a direct result of Donald Trump's own chaotic and reckless policies. The war in Iran, a conflict he escalated, then claimed he would wind down, only to escalate again with the consistency of a weather vane in a hurricane, is sending global energy prices into the stratosphere. His constant, unhinged threats of tariffs against everyone, including our closest allies, have thrown global supply chains into chaos, and who pays the price for that? You do. The American consumer pays for it at the gas pump, at the grocery store, in every single transaction. And yet, through all of this global turmoil created by Washington, Canada's inflation is cooling. Now you have to be asking yourself, how is this possible? How can it be that while the supposed leader of the free world is wielding tariffs like a medieval cudgel, Canada's economy is not just surviving, but stabilizing and showing signs of genuine strength? The answer lies in the quiet brilliance of Mark Carney's master plan. And believe me, this is a strategy they did not teach at whatever business school Trump falsely claims he graduated top of his class from. Mark Carney understood a fundamental truth that the Trump administration, in its fog of America First arrogance and bluster, completely failed to grasp. When you threaten a trading partner, when you treat an ally of over 100 years like a vassal state, you don't just reroute trade flows. You fundamentally alter behavior. You change national priorities. You force them to rewrite their entire economic and geopolitical strategy for survival. Carney's response to Trump's aggression was a masterstroke of strategic patience. He didn't panic. He didn't rush to the negotiating table to appease Trump. He didn't offer a single concession. Instead, he did something far more powerful. He doubled down on Canadian economic sovereignty. He initiated a historic pivot, a deliberate, methodical, and sweeping strategy to wean Canada's economy off its decades-long dependence on the American market. He began forging and strengthening new trade alliances with Europe and Asia. He launched the most ambitious domestic infrastructure and housing investment program in Canadian history. He set out to build a fortress of Canadian economic resilience from within. The nomination of Annette Ryan as the new parliamentary budget officer this week, a story that seems like inside baseball, is actually a critical piece of this grand strategy. Now you're hearing that Canadian Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois are raising alarms, questioning whether she'll be truly independent from Carney's government. But let me tell you what they are really afraid of. Their true fear is that Carney is about to install a budget officer who will provide the official validation for a level of public spending on infrastructure, on housing, on green energy, on nation-building projects that will permanently insulate Canada from the weaponization of American trade policy. Because that's what this is. Let's not mince words. Trump's tariff threats are not trade policy, they are economic warfare. They are a hostile act against America's closest friend, against a nation that shares the longest peaceful border in the world with us, against a country whose soldiers have fought and bled and died alongside American soldiers in nearly every major conflict for the last century. And Mark Carney looked at that ugly reality and said, "Fine. If that's the game you want to play, we will build a new game on a new field with new rules, and we will build an economy that doesn't need you nearly as much as your ego thinks it does." Just look at the sequence of events. Trump bellows his tariff threats. The American media dutifully runs with the pre-approved narrative that Canada's economy is on the brink of collapse. But what actually happens in the real world? The Bank of Canada calmly holds its interest rates steady. There is no panic. There are no emergency rate cuts to prop up a failing economy. They are holding their ground with the confidence of a poker player who knows they're holding a winning hand. They maintain their position because they see the underlying strength that Trump, in his ignorance, cannot. They see an economy that is already adapting, already transforming. Let's dig deeper into these numbers, because this is where the story gets truly fascinating. Global share markets took a brutal hit this week. That part is being reported everywhere. But what isn't being reported is why Canadian markets, while not immune, are weathering the storm with a resilience that has left American analysts baffled. What isn't being reported is that Canadian businesses are already living and thriving in a post-Trump tantrum world. For months, even years, Canadian exporters have been aggressively diversifying their markets. They saw this coming. When Trump launched his first volley of trade threats, Canadian CEOs and business leaders didn't sit around hoping for a savior in Washington. They got on planes, they went to Berlin, to Tokyo, to Seoul, to Mexico City. They started building the relationships, signing the deals, and establishing the supply chains in Asia, in Europe, and in South America. And now those relationships are bearing fruit. The drop in February's inflation is particularly stunning because it occurred despite the extreme global energy volatility caused by the Iran war. That war, a direct result of Trump's incoherent flip-flopping foreign policy, is creating massive upward pressure on global oil prices. As a major energy exporter, you would logically expect that volatility to pour directly into Canada's inflation numbers, sending them skyrocketing. But it didn't. And why not? Because Mark Carney's government has been managing the Canadian economy with something utterly alien to the Trump administration: quiet, sober, data-driven competence instead of policy by tweet storm at 3 a.m. And here is the part that is really going to enrage Trump when one of his aides finally musters the courage to explain it to him in very small, simple words. Canada's emerging economic resilience is making his primary weapon, the tariff threat, look completely impotent. Every single day that passes where the Canadian economy does not collapse, where Canadian businesses don't come crawling back to Washington begging for mercy, is another nail in the coffin of Trump's entire economic worldview. It's another piece of evidence that his entire strongman persona is built not on reality, but on outdated assumptions and a fragile, insatiable ego. Trump built his entire political identity on the myth that he is the ultimate deal-maker, the master negotiator who can bully anyone on the planet into submission. And Mark Carney, with his calm demeanor and methodical execution, is quietly and systematically exposing that entire identity as a fraud. Now let's talk about what Carney is doing with housing and infrastructure, because this is the long game, the strategic vision that Trump's Twitter-addled short attention span brain cannot possibly comprehend. The concerns being raised by the opposition about Annette Ryan's nomination aren't just about one individual. They are about the sheer scale of the public investment that Carney is about to unleash. Carney is looking at the Canada of tomorrow, a Canada that needs millions of new homes, a Canada that requires a 21st century infrastructure of ports, rails, and digital networks, a Canada that must be resilient in a world where its biggest neighbor can no longer be considered a reliable or predictable partner. And he is preparing to open the public coffers to build that new Canada. This isn't your typical run-of-the-mill government spending. This is economic nation building on a scale not seen in North America for generations. Think about what that means in concrete, practical terms. Every single dollar that Canada invests in building domestic housing is a dollar that creates a virtuous cycle within the Canadian economy. It employs Canadian construction workers, it buys Canadian lumber and materials, it builds Canadian cities and towns. It is an investment that is completely insulated from whether Donald Trump wakes up in a good mood or decides to threaten another trade war in an all-caps tweet. Every new infrastructure project Carney greenlights, better ports on the Pacific coast to reach Asian markets, more efficient rail lines to move goods east and west, a world-class telecommunications backbone, so Canadian tech companies can compete globally without being subservient to Silicon Valley, is another brick in the wall of economic independence from American whims. And here is the beautiful, delicious irony that a mind like Donald Trump's will never be able to process. By threatening Canada, by treating them like an adversary, Trump has actually done Mark Carney an enormous political favor. He has single-handedly given Carney the political cover and the public justification to make these monumental nation-defining investments. He has given Carney the ability to stand before the Canadian people and say, "Look, the world has changed. We cannot in good conscience tether our national destiny to the whims of an unstable and hostile American administration. We must build our own strength, our own resilience for ourselves." And the Canadian public, watching Trump's bizarre and insulting behavior, is nodding in widespread agreement. Do you honestly think Canadians want their livelihoods to be dependent on a country led by someone who openly insults them, threatens their jobs, and treats their entire nation with contempt? Trump has handed Mark Carney the political capital to fundamentally reshape Canada's economy for the next century, and Carney is seizing that opportunity with both hands. But let's bring this story back across the border for a moment, because every American worker, every American farmer, every American small business owner needs to understand what is really happening here. Trump sold his tariff policy to you as a tool to protect American jobs, America first, right? But what is the actual real-world result of his actions? He is systematically alienating America's single largest customer. Canada buys more American-made goods and services than any other country on earth, more than China, more than Mexico, more than the entire European Union combined. For generations, Canadian consumers have preferred American products. Canadian businesses have been deeply and seamlessly integrated with American supply chains. All of that entire multi-trillion-dollar relationship, is now under direct threat. Not because Canada wanted it this way, but because Donald Trump, in his infinite vanity, decided to pick a fight he has no idea how to win. As Canada methodically diversifies its economy away from American dependence, as Canadian consumers begin to consciously choose European or Asian products over American ones, as Canadian businesses forge new lasting relationships with non-American suppliers, those are American jobs that are vanishing forever. Those are American factories in the Rust Belt that are losing their most important contracts. Those are American farmers in the heartland who are losing their most reliable export market. Those are American communities that will suffer the consequences of this epic miscalculation. Trump doesn't understand this because he doesn't understand the first thing about modern economics. He still believes the simplistic 18th century idea that tariffs are magically paid by other countries. He thinks that threatening your friends makes them respect you. He sees all economic relationships as a zero-sum game, where for him to win, someone else must lose. And while he is fumbling around with that kindergarten-level worldview, Mark Carney is playing three-dimensional chess on a global scale. The fact that Canada's economy is thriving despite Trump's best efforts to sabotage it isn't just a Canadian success story. It is a profoundly American story about the catastrophic failure of leadership. It's a story about what happens when you elect a president who believes that bluster is a substitute for strategy and that cruelty is a form of strength. Every Canadian dollar that used to be spent on a Ford truck, an iPhone, or produced from California, and is now being spent on a Volkswagen, a Samsung, or produced from Mexico, represents a permanent economic shift. Those market relationships, those bonds of trust and commerce built over decades, they don't just snap back into place the moment Trump eventually leaves office. Canada is learning a powerful lesson right now. It can survive and indeed prosper without being so reliant on the American market. And once that lesson is fully learned, once those new supply chains and trade partnerships are firmly established, they are not coming back. The genie does not go back into the bottle. We also have to talk about how the Iran war is a critical catalyst in all of this, because it's not a coincidence that these events are unfolding simultaneously. Trump's utterly incoherent Iran policy, swinging wildly between escalation and de-escalation, is creating precisely the kind of global instability that supercharges Canada's pivot strategy. When global energy markets are in a state of constant panic because of American military adventurism in the Middle East, it dramatically strengthens Canada's hand as a stable, reliable, and democratic energy supplier. European nations, desperate for alternatives to Middle Eastern oil, are now looking to Canada with renewed interest. Asian markets, seeking long-term predictable partners, are far more willing to negotiate with Ottawa when they see nothing but chaos coming from Washington. Trump thought the Iran war would make him look like a strong wartime leader. He thought it would rally the country around him. But what it's actually doing on the global stage is broadcasting American unpredictability to the entire world. It's showing every other nation that the United States under Trump cannot be relied upon for stable, rational, or consistent policy. And sane, rational countries like Canada are responding in the only logical way, by building parallel systems and alliances that don't require American stability to function. The fact that Canadian inflation dropped despite the energy shock from the Iran war is a testament to sophisticated economic management. It showcases a government that can navigate a global crisis without panicking, a steady hand at the helm while the American ship of state is being tossed in a storm of its own making. And here is what should send a cold chill down the spine of every American who cares about our country's place in the world. Other countries are watching this unfold. They are watching Canada successfully call Trump's bluff. They are watching Canada's economy remain stable and its society remain calm in the face of direct American threats. And they are learning. They are learning that maybe they don't have to bow to every American demand. Maybe they, too, can build their own economic resilience. Maybe they can find their own paths to prosperity that don't run through Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, in his quest to put America first, is accidentally teaching the world how to build a world that needs America less. That will be his true, enduring legacy. The fact that Canadian conservatives and the Bloc Québécois are making a fuss about Carney's strategy is all the proof you need of how significant and real this shift is. They aren't arguing that his plan won't work. They are arguing about the details of its implementation, about oversight, about the sheer scale of the public spending he's about to authorize. That is a tacit admission that they recognize this is a fundamental restructuring of Canada's place in the world. Their fears about the parliamentary budget officer are really fears that they will have no power to slow down the Carney Revolution. Think about the profound failure of Trump's strategy that this represents. Trump assumed his threats would sow chaos and division in Canada. Canadian politicians would turn on each other in a desperate scramble to figure out how to appease him. Instead, the national debate in Canada is now about the best and fastest way to achieve economic independence from the United States. The debate is about how many billions to spend on nation building, not whether to spend it. The debate is about the fine points of Canada's pivot away from American dependence, not whether that pivot is necessary. Donald Trump has managed to do what no Canadian leader could. He has unified Canada across political lines against him. He has made Canadian economic sovereignty a winning, unifying political issue. You cannot buy that kind of political gift back, and Trump handed it to Mark Carney free of charge. So where do we go from here? We are at a historic crossroads, and the decisions made in the coming months will define the North American economy for a generation. Mark Carney is going to push forward with his massive public investment. The PBO issue will be resolved, and the money will begin to flow. Canadian infrastructure projects will break ground, Canadian housing construction will accelerate, and Canadian economic diversification will gather even more momentum. Trump, trapped in his own web of lies and ego, will keep threatening tariffs. He might even implement some. But each time he does, he will discover that their impact is weaker than he expected. He will find that Canada has built alternatives he never bothered to consider. He will find that his leverage is diminishing with each passing day. And meanwhile, American businesses and workers will start to feel the real pain. The auto parts manufacturer in Michigan that depends on Canadian steel will see its costs skyrocket. The tech company in Texas that exports to Canada will see its market share collapse. And American workers will start to ask a very simple question: why are our jobs being sacrificed for Donald Trump's ego? The economic data will keep rolling in, and it will keep telling the same story. Canada adjusting, adapting, and thriving, while American consumers pay higher prices and American exporters lose the global competition. The chasm between Trump's promises and the grim reality will grow ever wider until it is too large to ignore. This brings us to the very core of why this story matters so deeply. Trump's entire identity is built on the flimsy foundation of being a winner, a dominator, and Mark Carney is systematically dismantling that facade, not with insults or bravado, but with cold, hard competence. Trump cannot acknowledge that his Canada strategy is an abject failure, because doing so would require admitting he was wrong. It would require admitting that bullying doesn't always work. It would require admitting that his understanding of the global economy is dangerously shallow, and Trump's psychology makes such an admission impossible. So he will do what he always does. He will double down. He will lie more. He will scream louder. He will insist that Canada is on the verge of total collapse, that any day now they will come crawling to him. And every day that passes where that does not happen will be another quiet, deep humiliation that he cannot process or admit. This is the inevitable outcome when you elect a president whose ego is more important than sound policy, a man who would rather burn down a beneficial relationship than admit a mistake. Mark Carney doesn't have to actively humiliate Donald Trump. Trump is humiliating himself by being so utterly outmatched. Carney just has to keep doing exactly what he's doing, managing Canada's economy competently, building Canadian resilience, and proving to the world that there is a powerful alternative to submitting to American bullying. If you are watching this from anywhere in America, you need to understand the historical significance of this moment. For generations, the entire world, and especially our allies, operated on a core assumption that the United States, while sometimes flawed, was a reliable partner, a steady hand, a force for stability. Donald Trump has shattered that assumption, perhaps permanently. He has taught the world that American promises are temporary, that alliances are transactional, and that even America's closest friends can be declared an enemy overnight for domestic political gain. And the world is learning the lesson. Canada is writing the playbook for how to survive and thrive in the age of an unreliable America, and every other American ally is taking meticulous notes. South Korea is watching. Japan is watching. The European Union is watching. They are all seeing proof that resistance is possible. They are all learning that with smart, strategic leadership, it is possible to build a future that is not contingent on American goodwill. We are hurtling towards a reckoning that Trump is completely unprepared for, a moment when the gap between his furious rhetoric and the undeniable reality becomes impossible for anyone to ignore. He promised that his tough talk would command respect. Instead, America's closest allies are learning to simply work around him. He promised that America First would make America stronger. Instead, American workers are losing jobs and American families are paying higher prices. At some point, the bill for this kind of incompetent, ego-driven leadership always comes due. And we are watching that process unfold in real time with our neighbor to the north. Mark Carney's master plan was never some mystical secret. It was just good, competent governance. Build your domestic strength, diversify your relationships, invest in your own people, and maintain a steady, rational course, especially when your neighbor is having a public meltdown. The fact that this simple, sensible approach is utterly defeating Donald Trump's strategy tells you everything you need to know about how weak and hollow that strategy was from the very beginning. Trump mistook volume for strength. He mistook threats for leverage. He was wrong. And Canada, our friend and ally, is proving it to the entire world. The story isn't over, but the trajectory is clear. Canada is building a stronger, more independent future for itself. And in the process, America is losing influence, credibility, and the trust of its friends. And Donald Trump is being exposed as what he has always been, a performer whose understanding of strength is all show and no substance. That's the real story. That's what's actually happening. And it's going to keep happening no matter how loud he screams.